Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel and to the Rolling Stone. Hope that you are staying safe and free. Hope that you are staying warm and comfortable, especially now that the end of October has decided to be more like winter in some parts of the country. And I hope that you are all maintaining at least some of your sanity as we come to the end of this presidential election cycle. You know, I've often thought that if someone pushed a magic button somewhere and I was given complete, absolute, unequivocal power over the United States, one of the reforms that I would do, just immediately, is that I would change the terms of service, as it were, for the presidency. Instead of a presidential term of office lasting for 4 years, and then the president being able to serve either 2 terms or a total of 10 years. So, you know, in case a president dies in office, like 3 years into his first term, and then his vice president becomes president, that vice president could then run for president and win 2 terms of office, right? So it's either 2 terms or a total of 10 years. Instead of that, I would say that the president could only serve 1 term, but that term of office would last for 6 years. So no hope for re-election. And I'm sorry, if you're the vice president and the president dies, okay, you finish out that president's term, but then you are immediately disqualified from running for president. Sorry, but that's just sort of the gamble that you would have to take. Roll of the dice. That is one of the reforms that I would make so that we would not be subjected to this madness every 2 years. Because that's really what it is. Because if you've noticed, presidential campaigns, they don't start in the actual year of the election. They don't even start the year before. They start 2 years before. We have had people running for president since 2018, to the run-up to the midterms. We've really had people running for president. And it's insane. We're not supposed to focus on that 24/7. We're not just supposed to have a 2-year breather and then immediately be plunged into, oh, this person is running for president. What do you think of this person's policy? We weren't meant for that. We were meant for better and greater things than just petty politics. But unfortunately, that's the way it is. And talking about petty politics, let's start off this Rolling Stone with some petty politics. Again, we're not going to be talking about the last presidential election, which was this past Thursday, which was the 22nd, October the 22nd. I made it a point not to watch any of the presidential debates this year because I personally think that they are superfluous. I mean, think of it like this. When that last presidential debate was held on Thursday the 22nd, 50 million people had already cast their votes for the president. Okay? That is 50 million out of 240 eligible voters in the United States. That amounts to 21% of the voting population. Okay, 21% had already voted, which means that presidential debates are superfluous. People aren't watching them to mull over the issues, to judge the candidates or anything. They've already gone out and voted. 21% of them have. And in fact, some news organizations were saying, hey, you know, this third presidential debate, that was the lowest one this cycle. So, I mean, they are completely useless. So we're not talking about that, again, staying true to the course there. But we are talking about a story that did not get the attention that it deserved. This story is huge, but again, the curse of social media especially, and the curse of the 24/7 news cycle, is that a story appears on the radar, everyone loses their mind over it, and then just as quickly it blips out to be replaced by the next outrage, the next horrible, terrible thing, the next thing that someone has ruined, the next thing that someone has said, the latest scandal, etc., etc., etc. And what this story was the Supreme Court, the good old Supremes, our intergalactic arbiters, as Mark Stein has called them, or our Olympians, as I like to call them, our cascade of gods, as you will, our black-robed deities, stepped into it again, and they made just a huge decision that is going to have major repercussions. This might be the worst decision that the Supreme Court made this year after they legally abolished sex over the summer. Headline from Yahoo News: Why the U.S. Supreme Court letting Pennsylvania's extended ballot deadline stand is one of its most important decisions this year. So what happened? We need to go backwards. Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania legislature, the state legislature of Pennsylvania, they passed a law, bipartisanly, okay? Bipartisanly, they passed a law that said that if you mailed in your ballot, if you filled out a voting ballot and mailed it in order to be eligible to be counted, your ballot had to be received at your voting precinct no later than 8 p.m. on election day. Okay? It's very simple. For your mail-in ballot to be eligible, the voting district, the voting district had to have it by 8 p.m. on election day itself. Now, that was a bipartisan bill. Again, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which is now in the hands of the left, they simply decided that no, that's not enough. Okay, they simply changed election law because of a lawsuit that was brought up by the Pennsylvania Democrat Party. This from Yahoo News. In a mid-September ruling, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court issued a number of major decisions in response to a lawsuit brought by the state's Democratic Party challenging some of the state's election rules. In a win for Democrats, the court in Pennsylvania ruled to extend the deadline for mail-in ballots to be received from Election Day, November 3rd, to November 6th, 3 days afterwards, even if the ballot does not have a fully legible postmark. You know, that stamp that they put over your stamp? It is literally the stamp that they put over your stamp saying when it was received or when it was mailed out again, even if it doesn't have a legible postmark. So you can't tell when it was mailed, when it was received, or anything. It's still going to be counted. And it can be counted 3 days after Election Day. That decision, in and of itself, is horrendous for a couple of reasons, but let me hold on to those, okay, and go to the next item. What the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did is basically rewrite election law. Now, election law, like all laws, they're supposed to be written by the legislature. That's why we have legislatures. That's why we have our state legislatures. That's why we have the federal legislature in Congress, the House and the Senate. They make the laws. That's why we vote these people into office, however many years that they are. Every 2 years for the House of Representatives, every 6 years for the Senate. And I think that it's roughly the same for the state legislatures. Every state is a little bit different, so I'm not going to go there. But that's why we elect these people to office. That's why we pay their salaries. We pay their travel expenses. We pay for their retirement. We pay for everything for them so that they will do their jobs and actually legislate, make the laws. The Supreme Court in Pennsylvania simply said, nope. We are going to go a step beyond that. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court didn't even just say that Pennsylvania's law regarding mail-in ballots was somehow unconstitutional and that the legislature had to change it. No, it just arbitrarily said from now on, this is going to be voting law. It's horrendous. It was a complete grab of power. But it was a usurpation, actually, to use an old technical term that the founders would have recognized and used. It is a complete usurpation, of power. And then the United States Supreme Court let it slide. Why? Because there are only 8 justices on the Supreme Court right now since Justice Ginsburg passed away. And it was a 4-4 tie because Chief Justice John Roberts, the supposed stalwart conservative, who was nominated to the court by President George W. Bush, sided with the liberals on the court. And the rule is that if the Supreme Court is divided, then no decision has been reached, then the lower court's decision stands. That's how Pennsylvania's Supreme Court ruling is now. Theoretically, I guess, the law of Pennsylvania, even though it's not. Someone should just go up there and say, no, we're not following this rule. The local election officials should say, no, we're not following this rule because the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, the state Supreme Court, just pulled this out of their hat. The legislature didn't have a thing to do with this. We're not listening to you. This isn't the law. This is a sham. So there's all of that. Now, why did I say at the beginning, after my little introduction, that this is probably the worst Supreme Court decision since it legally abolished sex? Well, in the first place, it solidifies judicial usurpation of power. On that front alone, the Supreme Court should have been unanimous. This should have been an 8-0 ruling. Hey, no, you, the court, cannot make election law. That is for the state legislature. That's also why we have separation of power. But because it didn't, because Chief Justice John Roberts sided with the liberals and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruling was allowed to stand, this is now going to become precedent. Other state Supreme Courts, other courts are going to say, hey, remember what Pennsylvania did over there? We can try the same thing. And who knows? Maybe the Supreme Court will let our ruling stand as well. So that's the first thing. It puts us, it takes us down, it takes another step down the road of normalizing judicial usurpation of power, stealing it from the state legislature. Oh, and the legislature's not doing a damn thing about it. Not doing a thing. Instead of actually standing up for themselves, and they'll say, oh, well, you know what, we were ruled against. I guess we're just going to have to take it. I mean, have some brass and spine and defend your power. Be jealous about your power. Like the system was intended for you to do. I mean, in the Federalist Papers, James Madison says that's actually what's going to help keep this whole thing going, because the 3 branches of the government, they were talking about the federal government specifically, but it holds true for at the state level too. The 3 branches of the government, they're going to jealously guard their power, so they're going to be checking each other because they're not going to want to be less powerful than the other 2, or 2 are not going to want to be less powerful than one of the other ones. That's not happening. That is not happening, which leads to the second thing, because when this judicial usurpation of power is normalized, the legislatures and the legislators in it become more corrupt. And they become more corrupt because they figure, hey, I don't have to do my job. And we already have a bad case of this. Have you noticed that so often legislators will kick the can down the road? You know, they'll say that they phrase a law so that it's going to go to court. So then the court is responsible for actually deciding what the law says. Or remember in Obamacare, there were how many hundreds of times that the law said that the Secretary of Health and Human Services shall decide? They did that so that they could play the blame game. Hey, we didn't do that. It's not our fault that you're unhappy. You can still vote for us. We didn't do anything. It's their fault over there. These nameless bureaucrats or these judges over here. And you know, what happens to a judge or to a bureaucrat doesn't affect my seat. I can still run for re-election, and I can still say that I'm a friend and man of the people. So it does that as well. And then it does, we're going 3 for 3 here, it jeopardizes the entire election cycle. Think about this. Your mail-in ballot in Pennsylvania now, not only can it be received 3 days after the election, but it doesn't even have to have a legible postmark on it, meaning that thing could have been mailed at any time, any place. But if it's received on November 6th, it's going to be counted. That opens the system wide open for fraud and abuse. There are too many scam artists in the world, and there are too many stakes in the game here to actually trust human nature with all of those loopholes and all of those potentials for abuse. And then if we wanted to actually give a fourth reason why this is a horrible, terrible decision, is it makes the electorate lazy. It used to be that voting was, it was a mark of pride for Americans. And I'm going to say that it's true. You know, it's true that it's never been the case that the entire voting population of the country has actually voted. I think that the highest elections were in the late 19th century when close to 80% of all eligible voters were casting votes. But even during and I think and after World War II, it was only like 50%. But there was still a sense of civic pride about it. There was a sense of this was something that Americans did. Americans went to the polls on Election Day. Americans stopped what they were doing. And they took the time to stand in line and vote. Because they recognized that they were a Republican self-governing people, which required them not only to pay attention, not only to judge issues and candidates based on their worth and their merit, but then to actually sacrifice. Maybe that meant getting up an hour earlier so that you could stand in line at your local voting precinct and vote. Maybe it meant, using your lunch break for that. You know, it required just a little bit of sacrifice, a little bit of suffering, a little bit of inconvenience, but really, at the end of the day, not much to ask for a supposedly rugged Republican self-governing people. That's been tossed out the window. Now, in Pennsylvania especially, you can just mail that in. You know, why stand in line? You don't owe anybody your lunch hour. That's your lunch hour. You got to scroll through Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram or whatever. You can't actually, just wolf down a sandwich or maybe a smoothie from Smoothie King or something, while you're on the way to the polling place, to the polling booth, or on the way back to the office. You can't do that, especially now when long lines at voting precincts, at voting booths, that's considered now voter suppression. You know what? That's too hard for people. That's voter suppression. If you're waiting in line, in a long line to vote, and you're waiting an hour and a half to vote, that is just too much to ask of people. It has to be made simpler and easier. It has to be made less hard. I mean, which is great if you want to soften people up, if you want them to think that all of life, whether in the private sector, in the private sphere, in the home sphere, or in the public sphere, in the civic sphere, all of life should just be sunshine and rainbows, and the smallest bit of inconvenience is oppression now. It's great if you want to do that. If you want to remain a Republican self-governing people, however, which actually requires spirit, and a spirit not only of independence, but a spirit of being willing to sacrifice for your community, for the common good, for your country, then it's terrible. Those are all the things that the Supreme Court has put its stamp on, and especially what Chief Justice John Roberts has put his stamp on. That makes it the worst decision that the Supreme Court has made since it legally abolished sex. And that is story number one.